For our first video, for the series I'm doing for as part of my Techie Concordia Fellowship called a Moment with Marin, I would like to talk to you about your confinement. And I've seen one video on Facebook or Twitter of you talking about the confinement, and I really like the philosophical aspect or reflection that you have. And I'm going just to read a few sentences about what you said. You're talking about realignment, about one's opportunities, or to better ourselves, to find true joy into our lives, or the idea of contemplating the ideas of change. And I really like those four moments. So also the opportunity to reinvent and reinvigorate our fields. So for you, how is the confinement changing you as a person?
Well, I can't actually remember having this much time and so condensed and intense, in one place. I don't remember it. I think I've been on the move since I was a teenager, just constantly running. So stopping is for me, it was at first alarming because it's not what I'm used to. My pace is very, very fast. But stopping, I think, has given me the chance to start to think in bigger ways and in longer sentences in a way. I was leading a life of very short phrases.
Yeah.
And now I'm able to think in bigger sentences. So I think for me, that's the most important personal adjustment.
Yeah. And therefore, when do you have time to look at the score, or are you in this kind of mental atmosphere to also look at the score? And if so, do you feel how do you approach a score now? Do you feel you have a change in your mind as well about that?
Well, for me, for the score study, I'm still very engaged with teaching my students at Peabody, and I'm doing quite a few talks about various works. So it's been very interesting because I've had to look at these scores. We're working on Sacra right now with my students, and looking at the score, first of all, from a 30,000-foot level, to have the luxury to give a whole lecture and talk about, I hope it didn't feel like a lecture, but a discussion about 1913 and how monumental this piece was. We're so rushed often that we're not able to get the context, which is, of course, critical to being conductors, to be able to read biographies, read about the time they were living in. So this time is really allowing me to go much more into depth on certain works. And so, of course, that then bleeds over to the scores that I'm thinking about learning or that have been in my head. So I find it a very, I'm not sitting with a whole pile of scores saying, I've got to get through all these. Not at all. It's a much more, I think, organic process.
Yeah. I totally agree. I really like having the time and be able to take the time. It's really
it's very
important.
But don't you feel that often my students, I find they're just coming to conduct and they don't have a sense of where the piece falls in the trajectory of human history. What were the politics? How was society behaving?
Yeah,
Because
totally.
one day the music being written today, people will look back at this and say, this was a real departure for the human race. And how did that affect art?
Yeah, totally. I think as a student, if I come back to my student years, it was not a long time ago, but I was probably thinking a bit too much like this. And nowadays, now we are all,
Right.
I am, you are, we should be, I think, opening and putting into context. And
Yeah. And also then that leads right into thinking about our profession, thinking about our art form, thinking about our field, and why is it important? I think that's especially because the logistics of it, of gathering a large group of people to perform for a larger group of people physically together, is antithetical to our experience today. Everything's this way. But, I think the fact that music has been able to endure through the most difficult, and some of the greatest music has been written from times of great struggle. And when you think music shouldn't be coming out of the concentration camps, but this music is amazing, or, you know, during the wars, music shouldn't be, but it does. And I think we're going to see an incredibly rich resurgence in our field. Maybe the delivery system will adjust, you know, in some ways. Maybe it'll be a combination of in-person, online, outdoors. Who knows? I mean, that's all up for grabs. But I think we will have some very, very important art as a result of this.
Yeah, and I'm sure we're all in the situation where we cannot wait to join the orchestra again and to be with the musicians. And
Yes.
yeah, it can feel lonely.
Yeah, it's a real heartbreak, isn't it? I mean, I long for that connection to my musicians and to the sound of the orchestra.
I'd like to talk to you about reinventing concerts post-COVID, because since March, our ideas of performances, or actually simply in general, classical music, have evolved a lot. Can you first remember what you were thinking back then and how your thoughts have evolved since?
Well, I think as we're watching people attempt to get back into the concert hall, and we're watching the experiments with the distancing idea, and different repertoire, I'm always trying to think of what the advantages are and what the opportunities are. So I think that there are a lot of interesting moments that we could seize upon. The idea of the orchestra sitting in a very rigid configuration is it's not a rule. You know, we should remember that we can set the orchestra however we want. We can change it between pieces. I mean, it's just logistics that we're dealing with. But I think it's an opportunity to really start to highlight things that you want people to see or listen to. I was speaking with a colleague, Vladimir Jurovsky, the other day, and he was talking about his experience with the distancing, and that he feels that the sound blooms more because there's more space between the musicians. Of course, we talked about the challenges of trying to keep it together, the ensemble together, but I think that this opens up for me a whole way of thinking, not just about how the musicians are positioned and how we can do it musically so that the listener it's a theater piece almost now, but also how we position the audience. So maybe we create some kind of geometric pattern for them, something beautiful. You know, I think that we've gotten away from the importance of the audience, and we really need to remind them and ourselves how important they are. And then, of course, there's this fantastic world of repertoire for small orchestra that we rarely do. I mean, bigger is always better, of course. And it's a wealth of material. So I've been very excited looking at the chamber orchestra and even smaller, large ensemble repertoire again.
Absolutely. I mean, I've discovered quite recently in the past 2 years that Mendelssohn composed, 12 symphonies between the age 12 and 14 years old, and we simply never listened to them. And I'm playing them with my orchestra because they're absolutely fascinating and
yes,
live, etc. But do you think that, for instance, if you wanted to perform Mahler 1 or a big Mahler symphony, would you reduce the strings?
Well, I think it depends. There are these reductions of the symphonies that you can do, for 15 instruments, things like that. I think there's some pieces that really don't translate into being reduced. For me, the Mahler symphonies, it's an interesting curiosity, but it doesn't quite work. And in terms of doing a Mahler symphony, I think number 4, I definitely feel that as a chamber work, but other than that, I probably wouldn't opt for, 8 first violins. Plus, every time you get a page turn, it's very difficult to sustain that.
That's maybe where I think we talked about it with Maestro Slatkin about the iPad and the evolution of.
Right, that's right. That's right.
paper and stuff. And also, I feel like classical music it's a fact, right? It's quite elitist, and I'm seeing very little evolution in terms of how to break the barrier from the past. So, you know, people are still sat in their chairs. For me, they are passive listeners to the music. What can we bring to what was not there before? It seems like we need to scan again the economical, social, aesthetic model, and rethink of the audiences, like you said before.
Yes, I mean, I wonder whether it's a moment to really rethink whether this should be an art form that is reserved only for the people that can afford it. Because of course, the economics of it are terrible now. I mean, they've always been terrible, but now they're abysmal. And instead, maybe we should think about concerts as something that we do as a social service almost, so that, or at least some of them, so that we can open them up to the public and really have a much broader embrace and access point. And maybe we have to go outside, you know, outside the concert hall. Everybody's much more comfortable right now that the weather's, you know, getting warm. Let's play outside. Let's do things that, you know, are not so much along the formula of the system that we've created. Yeah. So I think it's a great opportunity.
Totally. And I'm thinking educational now. Do you think there is a part of education every orchestra can or perhaps should do during their concerts? I'm thinking of the English orchestra, Aurora Orchestra. It's a very alive chamber orchestra that allows the audience to actively dive in their universe. Like, for instance, for their last BBC proms, they had an actor playing the role of Berlioz, and he really challenged the audience, making them laugh in a very non-conventional way and actively understanding the role of the musical phrases and make them participate. Do you think we should all have a part of education?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm a huge proponent of demystifying classical music. You know, when you go back 150 years, everyone studied music. That was part of education. We don't have that same cultural history anymore as a society. So when people come into a symphonic music concert, they're really at a loss. You know, what is this? What's going on? So I think anything we can do to bring them in and demystify it. Of course, there are a lot of people that will say, look, this is making it accessible is dumbing it down. But I don't believe that. I believe making things accessible is making them accessible. That's it. It has nothing to do with the artistic excellence or the quality of what you're doing. In Baltimore, I started a series called Off the Cuff. So I'll take a major piece like the Dvorak 9, and I'll talk about it and show examples with the orchestra and, you know, talk maybe 20 minutes like that, and then play the whole piece. And it's one of the most popular series we've ever done because people want to know. They want to know the backstory. They're interested. They're curious. You know, we live in a society where information is right there at our fingertips, and people have that expectation. So I think the more we can do to educate, and educate might seem a little bit too patronizing, but, you know, more we can do to share, I think the better off we'll be.
Yeah, absolutely. With my orchestra, we do. I invite members of the audience inside the orchestra to feel the vibration too, and
Nice.
it's amazing what I'm hearing from them. Absolutely amazing. And I wish I could have had this opportunity when I was younger, but therefore I'm here to enhance this. And I'm looking forward to have more of those.
That's great.
Great. Thanks, Marin, again, and speak to you very soon.
Thank you, Chloe.
Bye.